At this moment, I'd love to welcome Rabbi Latz to the screen.
Well, hello, everyone. What a joy to be with all of you tonight. I'd like to share our very, very deep gratitude with our incredible speakers from Integrity First for America. We hope that you are inspired to support their critical work at the end of this evening. And we're really looking forward to a very robust conversation about not just white supremacy and white nationalism, but our role in our democracy and how all of us can be upstanders in this great country of ours. It is my terrific honor to welcome my beloved friend and colleague, Reverend Starr Brown from First Covenant Church. Gia and I have been friends and colleagues and comrades for a while, and she is the person who, during the uprising last summer, following the murder of our neighbor George Floyd, she is literally the one who I stood beside during those days. And she is not only my friend, she is an inspiration, and I'm delighted that she is going to open us tonight with her holy words. Pastor Starr Brown.
Good evening. When I was asked to provide the open reflection for this event, I thought about the tone that I wanted to bring forth as we step into this important conversation. As many of you may know, white supremacy has taken on such a role that it becomes more so an issue that needs to be addressed or an object that needs to be overcome. White supremacy has affected so many lives. White supremacy has destroyed so many lives. And to keep those lives at the forefront, I wrote a spoken word piece several years ago that I thought would be appropriate as we shape this critical dialogue. In addition to being a pastor, I'm a mother of 5, 4 daughters and 1 son. And so this spoken word piece reflects conversations that I have had and continue to have with them to prepare them for the long uphill road that they must travel, merely and unfortunately just because of the color of their skin. So I just want to invite you to sit wherever you are, close your eyes, lean in and listen to the hearts and the hopes of people, of lives that are impacted by white supremacy. I call this my lament at the talk, a true story. Is today the last day that I will ever see your face? Hold your hand or braid your hair, tie your shoes. I just need a trace of hope. I'm so tired. I'm so tired of this sighing. I am crying, all the dying. I am crying. I'm so tired. I'm not wired for all this fighting and all this slighting, all this wrong and never righting. It is consuming. Stop assuming that they see you. They don't see you. I am leading and I am weeping. I am needing. My heart is bleeding. I'm weeping. Where is God? I need you to stop feeding. I'm so tired. I'm not wired for the fray. Get away, stay away from the protest, child, from the streets and from the sheets. They don't see you. Stay away for today. Is tomorrow my last day? Stay away from all the hype and all the fights and all the slights. 10 and 2, eyes on you, home tonight. They don't see you. No more fights. Home tonight. Hold your head up. Don't be late. Don't argue. Never argue. Home by 8. Never late. This talk with my children, a true story. Is today the last day that you'll ever see my face, hold my hand or braid my hair, tie your shoes? I just need a trace of hope because I am so tired. I'm so tired of this sighing. I am crying, all this dying. I'm crying. I'm not wired. I'm so tired for all this fighting and all this slighting, all this wrong, and you'll never be right. And it's consuming. Stop assuming that they see you. They won't see you. I'm leading and I'm weeping. I'm needing. My heart is bleeding. Where is God? I'm so tired. I'm not wired for this fray. Get away. Stay away. Stay away from the protest and from the streets. Stay away from those sheets. They won't see you. Stay away just for today. Is tomorrow my last day? Stay away from all the hype and all the fights and all the slights. 10 and 2, eyes on you. Home tonight. They won't see you. They won't see you. No more fights. Home tonight. Hold your head up and don't be late. Don't argue. Never argue with them. Home by 8. Don't be late. This talk is on repeat. I know these words by heart. We need to break this cycle, end this cycle, and start from start. We must leave the room and change the tune. Stop consuming and don't assume. Can we pause and turn the page and the drama and leave the stage? It's the story. It's my story. End the drama. Turn the page. It's your story. It's our story. Tired actors, end this rage. Stop our blaming and stop the shaming. All this naming, are we framing? It's the system, it's the design, it's the pollution, an endless line. You don't see me? You should see me. I'm invisible. Why can't you see me? Turn the lights on and stop the traffic. You don't see me, but I matter. Don't run me over and don't assume. We're all important. Don't assume. When you see me, I'll stop waiting, blocking streets. I'll stop waiting. It's the system. Where's my help? It's our story. You're my help. Turn the page and heal me, God. Make me whole. God can save. How long must I weep, Lord? How long must I weep? Can I truly be a pastor, a mother with these feelings? Can I be a shepherd and a sheep? My strength in this is waning. Am I expected to keep explaining? I'm important, God. Don't you see me? Don't let me die because I'm alive. I hope that this conversation is one that is impactful and meaningful, that changes perspectives and lives. I hope that this spoken word piece is one that humanizes the experiences of those who are impacted by white supremacy, not just because of the color of our skin, not just African Americans or people of color. All of us are impacted by white supremacy. This is all of our stories. This is all of our work. So thank you, Rabbi Latz, for the invitation to be here and to open this important space and dialogue. And I hope that as we move forward, that we'll move forward together toward justice. Thank you.
Reverend Starr Brown, thank you. Thank you for reminding us this is not an issue. This is about human lives. I am blessed to be your colleague and your friend. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us tonight for this important discussion with Integrity First for America. I think we all agree that we are living in terrifying times, but the work of Integrity First for America gives us hope, providing tangible ways to take action against violent white supremacy and extremism that's poisoning our country. Just this last week, there was a brutal, horrific attack on, and I apologize if I get their name wrong, Higashu Hongani at a Buddhist temple in LA. The rise of anti-Asian discrimination is appalling and horrific. 3 years ago, neo-Nazis and white supremacists descended on Charlottesville, Virginia for a weekend of violence. But that violence was no accident. It was the result of months of planning. And it previewed the extremist terror that has followed all the way to the US Capitol nearly 2 months ago today. Integrity First for America, in partnership with a world-class legal team, is taking on individuals and hate groups at the center of this violent movement, holding them accountable in federal court for the violence they brought to Charlottesville in 2017. We are joined tonight, and I am blessed to be in this conversation with them and with each of you, by Integrity First for America Executive Director Amy Spitalnick and lead attorney Rabbi Kaplan, who are going to discuss this landmark lawsuit and the fight against hatred. Many of you know Rabbi Kaplan from her extraordinary fight in the Windsor case, the US versus Windsor, which overturned the provision of the Defense of Marriage Act, stating it was unconstitutional, landing the first major victory in the battle for marriage equality. That was a personal victory. My husband is from Canada. And with that victory, because we were married, I was able to sponsor him for a green card. Robbie's work has had a personal impact on my life, and I'm forever grateful. You should know she's a rock star litigator. She's partnering with Integrity First for America and the suing of more than 24 Nazis. She has multiple clients. She wrote Then Comes Marriage, the United States versus Windsor and the Defeat of Doma. She's gotten a bazillion honorary degrees, most notable from the Jewish Theological Seminary. And late at night, when I despair, my fantasy is that President Biden will nominate Rabbi Kaplan to the US Supreme Court, and we can spend the rest of our days watching her go toe-to-toe with Justices Thomas, Alito, and Barrett. A guy can dream, right? Amy Spitalnick is Integrity First for America's executive director. It's a nonprofit civil rights organization that's backing this federal lawsuit. Amy has been involved in government and politics and advocacy. She worked as the communication director and policy advisor to the New York Attorney General, the communications advisor and the spokesperson for the New York City Mayor, the communications director for the New York State Senate, on a number of federal, state, and local campaigns. She has been called a rising star of 40 Under 40, a Truman National Fellow, a Women in Power Fellow at the 92nd Street Y, and is just not only a delight, but a powerhouse. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Amy and Rabbi in just a second. I'll just note that in the chat, if you need closed captioning, sign into Ava. Kim and Becca are interpreting for us. Thank you so much for making this accessible. It will be recorded. And right now we're gonna watch a brief, short video, and then we'll launch into a Q&A with Rabbi and Amy. So sit back, folks, and take it all in.
Terror in Charlottesville. Stark displays of racism.
Trying to promote a car has rammed into a crowd.
Victims thrown in the air.
Deadly act of domestic terror.
One woman dead, others children wounded.
10 of the people who were injured in Charlottesville, including 3 of the people who were hit by that car and survived, have now brought a lawsuit against not only the murderer who drove his vehicle into the crowd, but also the leaders of all of the white nationalist groups that organized and promoted the Charlottesville event.
We are Integrity First for America. We are here to disrupt the extremism, to interrupt the cycle, to dismantle and bankrupt these hate groups and their leaders, to put them out of business, and most importantly, to stop the violence. Integrity First for America is leading the fight against white supremacy. Our Charlottesville lawsuit is the only current legal effort taking on the broad leadership of this movement, holding white supremacists accountable for their premeditated violence. We know that it's working. They're already facing huge financial and legal consequences. But we also know what we're up against. Bankrupting Nazis isn't cheap. These groups are still recruiting, weaponizing fear, and preparing for their next attack. Now more than ever, we are reminded of our obligation to dismantle the systems of white supremacy that poison this country. Turn your outrage into action, because hate has no place here.
It's my honor to welcome Rabbi and Amy to the conversation. So Rabbi Kaplan and Amy Spitalnick, I am so honored to be here with you. So Amy, I'm gonna start with you. And I'm gonna ask the question, if you can paint a picture for us. You know, the last 4 years, there has been so many dreadful, awful, horrific things that have happened. I think it would be helpful for people to just hear kind of what happened in August 2017 in Charlottesville, and if you could sort of describe to us the events of the day so we can all gather on the same page.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Rabbi Latz and Reverend, and everyone for taking time out of their evenings. I know times are not easy and we are all overwhelmed, and the fact that you are taking an hour out of your busy lives to engage on this, it just means the world to us, so thank you. It's easy to forget that 3.5 years ago in an American city, neo-Nazis and white supremacists were so emboldened that they could storm that city and bring with them the destruction and the violence and the death and injury that they caused. But that's what happened in Charlottesville 3.5 years ago. I think many of us remember how we felt so viscerally when we watched those images of the neo-Nazis with tiki torches marching on the University of Virginia, chanting things like "Jews will not replace us," "Blood and soil," "White lives matter." They had intentionally chosen tiki torches to evoke the Nazis and the KKK. And they descended on the University of Virginia, ultimately surrounding a small group of peaceful counter-protesters at the Thomas Jefferson statue, where they kicked, punched, threw fuel and lit torches at them, again chanting those awful Nazi slogans and other racist and anti-Semitic phrases. One of our plaintiffs who was there that evening, an African-American undergrad, said he thought he was going to die. And nearby, an interfaith gathering was taking place that had to, ironically, shelter in place. It had been created as a safe space for the community to come together, knowing that white supremacists were descending on their town. And the irony of it being so unsafe outside those doors shouldn't be lost on any of us. The next day, Saturday, August 12th, I think we all know how the day culminated in the car attack that killed Heather Heyer and injured many others. But it's important to understand that it was fully a day and a weekend of violence. The day started with these neo-Nazis descending, this time on this local synagogue in downtown Charlottesville. It was a Saturday morning. They were celebrating Shabbat. And these extremists carrying semi-automatic weapons, chanting things like Sieg Heil, talking about, quote, torching those Jewish monsters in their online chats, surrounded the synagogue. The Torah scrolls and congregants had to be evacuated out the back. And the detail that always gets me every single time, no matter how often I share it, is that the synagogue was home to a scroll that had been saved from Nazi Germany. And in 2017 in America, it was once again under Nazi threat. And that just gets me every single time. The violence continued. They specifically targeted the Black neighborhoods of Charlottesville, driving these white vans around. They charged a line of interfaith clergy, including one of our plaintiffs, Reverend Seth Wispelway. And the day culminated in a car attack where James Fields drove his car into a crowd of peaceful counter-protesters, killing Heather Heyer, injuring many, including our plaintiffs, some of whom you saw in that video, like Marcus Martin, who sprawled across the back of the car in that Pulitzer-winning photo. And what's so important to understand here is that nothing that happened in Charlottesville was an accident, but rather it was planned meticulously for months in advance on social media. And so it is that conspiracy, that meticulous planning, that is the basis of our lawsuit.
Thank you, Amy. That's really, really helpful. So, Rabbi, we know there's a criminal case with the person who did the violence, but you aren't doing a criminal trial. You're doing a civil trial. Can you tell us, how did the case come about? And there was a hashtag about punching Nazis, but you're suing the Nazis. Talk to us.
So before I go there, Rabbi, let me just say one thing. Thank you so much for the lovely kind introduction. but you're going to have to keep on dreaming at the idea that I would have a seat on the Supreme Court. But I think
A guy can dream. A guy can dream.
I take a lot of dreams. So let me just tell the story of how it came about, because it's, you know, things happen in the world and they happen in a certain way, and that's kind of what happened here. I had been a partner at a big law firm in New York for many years, Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison. And in July 2017, largely in reaction to the election of President Trump and what I thought that would portend for our country, I decided to start my own litigation boutique. And we opened up our offices on July 1, 2017. We moved into offices, though we worked kind of from a barn for the first month in the country. And we moved into our offices in the city on August 7, 2017. So just before what happened. And that first week we were in our offices was really the weekend after Charlottesville. And I remember thinking, you know, I really wanted the law firm to be devoted to both public interest and private cases. And I wanted to show that devotion. So that Monday, which was the 14th, I believe, the 13th, we decided that we were going to have lunch and we were going to watch the coverage of what had happened. And naively, I was like, okay, I'm going to order a pizza in, which was kind of stupid and inopportune, but we're going to sit and watch what was going on. The coverage that day, for anyone who remembers it, was shocking. One or two of my paralegals got so upset that they kind of ran out of the room crying. In addition to that, that was the day, as I recall, that President Trump gave the speech about verifying people on both sides. And as I was listening to this happen, I thought to myself immediately, look, the guy who's now the Attorney General of the United States of America is Jeff Sessions. Call me crazy, but he doesn't have a great record on civil rights. So I don't think he's going to be very motivated to look at this the way that the Department of Justice, and in particular, the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice should, and frankly is supposed to be dedicated to doing. If the government's not going to do it, someone needs to do it. And I guess I'll do it. And I thought back immediately to a case that my mentor, Paul Weiss, had done about a website. I don't know if anyone remembers this, called the Nuremberg Files. Whenever you're dealing with these people, it's always about the Nazis. Like they always go to the Nazis very, very fast. And so they had a website back in the 90s, early 90s, called the Nuremberg Files, that put up the photos of doctors, mostly in the South and in the West, who performed abortions. And they would put their home addresses and their information. And then when those doctors were injured and one of them was killed, they would put a red X over their photographs. And the theory of my colleague's case was that was an incitement to violence, and it was a violation of the Violence Against Women Act. They won that case at trial. They got a multi-million-dollar verdict. It went up on appeal twice, but they ultimately sustained that verdict. And then they spent many, many years, as Amy has intimated, kind of chasing these guys down. If they got a job, they would seek to garnish their wages. If they would want to buy a house, they would put a lien on the house. And it did have quite an impact. There's still obviously radicalism in the anti-abortion or anti-choice movements today, but that kind of concerted violence where doctors are being killed, thank God, isn't such an active thing today. So I thought to myself, well, can we try that strategy here? I called a friend who probably many people watching this know, Dahlia Lithwick. She's a famous writer who writes for Slate magazine about Supreme Court and American law and legal process. I wasn't actually calling her about that. I was calling her because I knew she lived in Charlottesville. And I called her up and I said, look, Dahlia, I got this crazy idea. What do you think? And she said, I think it's a great idea, but you need to know, ironically, we are right in the process right now of packing vans to move up to New York with she has two sons who are about the age of my son, to move to New York because we've decided we can no longer live here. This anti-Semitism, she lived there for 25 years, but the anti-Semitism is so pervasive that we don't think we can raise our sons here anymore. We're moving to Brooklyn, but you should come down to Charlottesville. I'll put you in touch with a whole bunch of people and you'll go from there. So that's what we did. We were on a plane, I think within 48, 72 hours. The town was very much still in a state of shock. Those white vans that people heard about were still driving around the streets, particularly in the African-American neighborhoods, and people were rightly terrified of them. We met with a whole bunch of people, including some of our plaintiffs in the place. Reverend Whistleaway was one of the people we met with that weekend. And we said to all of the people we met with, look, you know, many of whom were very injured, if you need to get money right away, this is not the case for you. You might have a case against the police department for negligence. You might have a case against the University of Virginia on Friday night for not doing enough to stop what happened. You should pursue those cases if you want to, that would be great. But if you do that, you can't do our case. And you should know that our case is going to take a very long time to do. And at the end of the road, there might not be that much money. Despite those warnings, all the plaintiffs who you saw in the video, including Reverend Seth and others, agreed to do it. And then what we needed, well, I'd say we got a lucky break, and then we had to come up with a legal theory. So the lucky break is there's a group out there called Unicorn Riot, who people are probably familiar with from the BLM protests. And they somehow got their hands from someone who hacked into the Discord servers that the men and groups who planned Charlottesville had been using for weeks to plan what happened. So Discord was a gaming site. It was originally just used for gamers, but the alt-right sometime in the spring, winter of 2017, took it over and started creating chat rooms to plan for what was called Unite the Right, which became the Charlottesville massacre and rally. And they were very organized about it. They had chat rooms devoted to things like weapons, uniforms, travel, accommodation, leadership, you name it. There were two guys who had the ability to let people into those chat rooms. You had to apply. And Unicorn Riot basically published, not all of it, but a substantial part of their communications leading up to Charlottesville. So when we saw those communications, we knew we had a case. It's very rare to get discovery like that before you file a case, but here we had it. And then we needed a legal framework, and this is where it kind of gets both sad and ironic. The law that we had to turn to is a law that's now people know about because of what happened at the Capitol, but it's a law that's not been used very much in our country. It's called the KKK Act of 1871. It means exactly what it says. It was passed by Congress during the Reconstruction to prevent states, mostly in the Deep South, Mississippi, Alabama, et cetera, from effectively re-enslaving the newly freed African-American slaves in the South. And it was intended to operationalize the guarantee of the 13th Amendment, which is no slavery. Again, it hasn't been used very often. The reason we turn to it is that it's one of the very few civil rights statutes that pertains to private conduct rather than government conduct. And it basically says that if you conspire to commit racially motivated violence in a way that has what's called the badges and incidents of slavery. What I mean by badges and incidents of slavery, if you do something that effectively demeans African Americans, other minority groups, and their supporters in a way that kind of make it seem like you want to re-enslave them, or that you're reenacting slavery in some symbolic way, then you can be liable under the statute. It was used, obviously at the time it was passed, quite effectively. It was used again in the 1920s. There were terrible race riots in the 20s. It was used then. And the most recent time it was used, sadly, and not surprisingly, I guess, was during the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. There are a couple very important Freedom Rider cases where Freedom Riders were killed and then their parents sued under the KKK Act and succeeded. So we had to turn all the way back to this statute to bring a case. And effectively, the case that we brought is that all these groups and individuals who we could see from their chats on Discord were engaging in a concerted, intentional, carefully planned conspiracy to come to Charlottesville the days that they came, to commit and incite others to commit racially motivated violence against minority groups and their supporters, that they effectively planned it, they then did it, and then the day or two after, they celebrated their great success. And that's what a conspiracy is, and that's what we've alleged in the case. So that's kind of how it came to be.
Thank you, Rabbi. That is spectacular that you were able to put all of that together. Amy, I'm wondering if we can pick up on this thread and talk for a minute. I know that a lot of us for many years wanted to believe that this was like, you know, most people are not terribly racist. We're nice folks. You know, we don't use the N-word. But, and like, you know, this is just a couple of bad apples. But I think that you're alleging this is part of a much broader, well-financed network. And I'm wondering if you could talk about, like, you know, this wasn't just a bunch of displaced, disgruntled folks featured in Hillbilly Elegy. This really was a much broader, well-financed group of people. And if you can lay that out for us, because I know for me, I humbly submit that this has been part of my own learning, that I'm still surprised by that, and I shouldn't be, shame on me, but that we all have, especially white folks who want to be good allies and accomplices for racial equity and for racial justice, need to really understand the vastness of this network.
Absolutely. And I think specifically given where we are, I also want to name that Charlottesville and the murder of George Floyd and so many of these other incidents over the last few years are not isolated incidents. They're part of a broader system, as you described. They are the symptoms of a disease, and that disease is white supremacy. And we are seeing those symptoms sort of flare up right now because of a variety of factors, including the last 4 years in this country, as you alluded to, and so much else, particularly with the pandemic being a perfect moment for conspiracies, extremism, and violence to thrive. And so it's important to understand all of this in that context. And so it's not just anecdotal. I think any of us watching what has happened in this country over the last few years knows in our gut that we are dealing with a crisis here, but the statistics also back this up. So we know, for example, that hate crimes hit their deadliest level ever in 2019, according to the FBI, that the Department of Homeland Security named white supremacy the most persistent and lethal threat to the country, that the ADL says anti-Semitic incidents hit record levels, and that of all of the sort of extremist murders, as they call them, nearly every single one was committed by a far-right extremist, the majority of whom were white supremacists. You can go on and on and on about the record levels, domestic extremism, racism, hate crimes, anti-Semitism that we're talking about here. And the stats all back up what we know, which is that this is a crisis. We are dealing with a crisis of far-right extremism and white supremacy in this country, and is manifesting in a variety of ways. We, of course, are taking on specifically the domestic extremism that has that sort of came to a head in Charlottesville and the subsequent cycle of violence, but it's part of this broader system, and it's so important to understand it that way. But we also know that there are deep and disturbing connections between the defendants in our lawsuit and this broader cycle. To your point, that this is not an isolated incident. Each attack is used to inspire the next one, and over again, we see how our defendants are so central to this cycle. So for example, the Pittsburgh shooter who killed 11 praying at Tree of Life congregation 2.5 years ago communicated with some of the Charlottesville leaders on Gab, which is a far-right site, before his attack. The Christchurch shooter who killed dozens of Muslims praying in mosque in New Zealand 2 years ago first donated to two of our defendants, Richard Spencer and Andrew Anglin, and then painted onto his gun before the attack a white power symbol known as a hashtag that was popularized by Matthew Heimbach, another one of our defendants. And Christchurch was live streamed on Facebook and seemed to in turn inspire the Poway Chabad attack, the El Paso Walmart attack, and you can go on and on and on in this cycle in which you see each attack inspire the next one. And so our theory of change here is a simple one, which is that by going after the groups and the leaders that are at the center of this movement, that are most directly responsible for the violence in Charlottesville, but also have these deep and disturbing connections to the broader cycle of white supremacist terror, we can effectively bankrupt and dismantle them through large civil judgments and have a major impact on their ability to operate deter others, and send a very clear message about the consequences for this sort of hate.
Wow. I have like 4,000 questions. Okay. So Amy and Robbie, and I don't know who should field this. I have two interrelated questions. One, picking up on that thread, Amy, is somebody in the chat is curious about if there's been any explicit connections been made yet between Charlottesville and the insurrectionist terrorist attack on the US Capitol on January 6th. And the second broader question is that it seems to me that these attacks are against Sikh temples. Tree of Life was about being involved with highest and protecting immigrants. We've got Walmart, where people were mostly Latino who were murdered in a very integrated southern town of El Paso, right? Like it seems to me that their agenda, and I'm sure that there's a more sophisticated language for this, is they're just really infuriated that Black and brown and Native and Muslim and Jewish people and women and trans people are being treated like human beings. And is there anything more complicated about it? Like, I'd love to just know, like, it just seems like they want to make America white.
It's more, I would say it's almost I would say if they had to put their slogan on a hat, it would be "Keep America White" or something like that, because as horrific as it is, because the underlying ideology that is underpinned so many of these attacks, Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, Poway, El Paso, Christchurch, on, is something called replacement theory, which is exactly what you were just speaking to, or the Great Replacement. And it's this idea that with the Jews as the puppet masters, because we always are as Jews, we are orchestrating the replacement of the white race by supporting the Black community, the Latinx community, the LGBTQ community, the immigrant and refugee community, the Muslim and Sikh communities. You can go on. And everything that is undermining their vile and narrow vision for a white ethno-state has to be the responsibility of these puppet masters and needs to be combated. And so that's what they mean when they say Jews will not replace us. They're talking about Jews actively replacing the white race through our support for other communities. It's why the Pittsburgh shooter, as you suggested, chose Tree of Life, because Tree of Life specifically worked with highest to support immigrants and refugees. We saw the same replacement theory at play in so many other attacks. It's also important, I think, to call out when this vile white supremacist conspiracy manifests not in the obvious ways that I just described, but also in the more subtle but equally dangerous ways. When you hear far-right conspiracies about George Soros supporting the Black Lives Matter protests, or funding a caravan coming up from Central America, or any of the other things that have been increasingly mainstream on the right, this speaks precisely to that same sort of white supremacist conspiracy theory that there is a Jew orchestrating Black and brown and other communities taking over this country. And it also is central to this idea of stopping the steal that fueled the Capitol attack, this idea that the country is somehow being stolen from the white people who they believe should be in power. And so while the Capitol attack wasn't exclusively organized white supremacists in the same way that, say, Charlottesville was, it's obvious that white supremacy was central to what happened there in both explicit and implicit ways. There's so many other connections there, but I will stop and pass it to Robbie and back to you.
So I would say there's a professor at Columbia Law School by the name of Kimberly Crenshaw, and she came up with this term intersectionality. I don't think I ever fully understood intersectionality until I started working on this case. Because the one thing that is absolutely crystal clear is that these people are intersectional in their hatreds. They hate anyone who's different. They hate all the minority groups that we just mentioned in the United States of America. And that kind of multifaceted hatred seems to become even more powerful by the fact that they have this sense, as Amy talked about, that somehow we are all replacing them.
Thank you. It's interesting, right? And I'd love for you to talk for a moment about both your and Amy motivation to do this work as Jews. And I want to talk about this work has not been cost free, right? There have been attacks and threats against you and your families. So I want to get to that. But it's an interesting thing because as you're saying this, and there's somehow I'm supposed to be insulted that people are saying that Jews want to stand with other minority communities, that Jews want to stand on the right side of history with, for justice, for immigrants, with trans people, with Jews of color, with like.
But it's not even that we want to stand. This is what's so sick and hateful and weird about what they say. They believe that I'm obviously Jewish, that we're the masterminds.
Right.
Their view is that the Black people and the African Americans and the Muslims and the immigrants, they're not smart enough on their own to achieve all this success in American society. So how did they achieve it? They relied on George Soros. They relied to hear Marjorie Taylor Greene on the Rothschilds and the space lasers. It was the Jews somehow in this insane view that goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, as Deborah Lipstadt will testify in our case, that the Jews have somehow are the puppet masters here. And I have to say one thing, it's hard to shock me, frankly, now, A, because I've been enmeshed in this case, and B, because I practice law for a living. But the one part of this case that really, truly shocked me is when we read their texts, while it's true that they hate all these groups, the group that they talk about the most in their chats are the Jews. Why was that shocking to me? Because it's true, many of these people come from rural communities. I don't think they probably know that many Jews. But when you read the Discord communications leading up to Charlottesville, the almost unremitting focus on anti-Semitism, really old kind of stereotypes of Jew hatred is truly stunning. And in fact, when we can talk about this more, when they attack us, there's a lot of things people could attack me for. The fact that I'm an open lesbian, the fact that I won a big case at the Supreme Court, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a lawyer, yada, yada, yada. But in almost all the attacks against me, they focus on the Jewishness, and they have these images of me that look like they could come from Nazi Germany with my nose. One thing I don't have is a large nose, but with my nose going out 6 feet in front of my face. It's truly stunning. And so for any Jew who thinks that they're not part of this, that they're somehow white and not associated with these other groups, you are sorely mistaken if you think that.
And to just add a very fine point to what Rabbi was saying, this also speaks to how deeply intertwined our faiths are here. You can't take on racism and white supremacy without taking on anti-Semitism, and you certainly can't take on anti-Semitism without taking on this white supremacy, because it is anti-Semitism that is at the core of white supremacy, and it goes in so many different directions, but our faiths are so deeply intertwined here. And so these white supremacists thrive by trying to pit our communities against one another, because they know it's only when we're united that we're going to be able to effectively stop them. And it's so important that we not fall prey to that.
No, Amy, thank you. And I want to talk for a minute about being you are not only, both of you, Jews in public, but you've taken on a case with people who have showed us that they will go to violent extremes to make manifest this replacement theory, that they are willing to die for this cause and kill other people in the process. And I'd love to talk with you and hear from you for a moment, both just about how are you doing? Like, how are you sleeping at night? Okay. And I know that Integrity First for America, one of the reasons why you're out here doing these programs and fundraising is that you all have really serious security detail. And I don't want to go into the specifics, but I'd love to talk just about this case comes at a serious cost. And I feel like it's incumbent upon the public to know what you're doing is extraordinary and heroic. And I want to hear, as my teenagers would say, spill the tea.
I can start and then Robbie can jump in if that works. So look, you alluded to this. To be completely straightforward, security is the biggest line item in IFA's budget. We have attorneys like Robbie and many others who are generously donating their brilliant minds and time to this case. And for that, we are so grateful. But when you're taking on neo-Nazis in court, they are not particularly enthused about the fact that they're being sued. They've tried every trick in the book to avoid accountability. And one of the biggest tools that they use is fear and harassment and threats as a means to avoid accountability here. And so we, in terms of Robbie and myself, perhaps because we're both sort of proud public Jewish women, have been their two biggest targets, unsurprisingly. Although they, of course, target others on our team, our plaintiffs. And we're going to need to ensure that our team is safe. Of course, we have been for the last few years, and certainly when we go to trial for weeks at a time in Charlottesville this October, which is when our case is scheduled, will require significant security. And as I said, that's by far the biggest line item in our budget. And the threat there is not just their own capacity for violence. We know these are vile, violent people. Some, like Chris Cantwell, one of our defendants, has directly threatened Robbie. He actually just last week was sentenced to 41 months in prison for another threat he made against a fellow white nationalist, but Robbie sent a letter to the court detailing the threats against her and the impact it's had on her, which you can find on our website, and I would encourage folks to read. But equally concerning, if not more so, is the ability of our defendants and their supporters to rile others to action. So they know how to post online in ways that walk the line, that don't become actionable by social media companies that have been way too hesitant to act in a variety of ways, which I'm sure might come up in the remaining time we have, and by law enforcement who can't necessarily take action unless it's a clear threat. And so they know how to walk that line, and the risk there is that they inspire their followers to action. This is a direct tool that they use. So for example, putting Robbie and I on a list of Jews fighting white supremacy called the Noticer. They were noticing Jews fighting white supremacy and created this list specifically so that we could be targeted and harassed. And this is what they do. And it's a tool, again, to really avoid accountability in this lawsuit, and accountability writ large. And we are not going to let them do that. We are going to keep our team safe. But please know that if you donate to IFA, it is funding security for our team, for our lawyers, for our plaintiffs, for our expert witnesses like Deborah Lipstadt and others at trial, because this is how they try to avoid accountability, and we simply won't let them.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to add other than, the fact that Cantwell is going to spend another 2 years in jail. It certainly helps me sleep better at night, as I explained to the judge. I mean, it's some of it is some pretty scary stuff.
So I feel like that's a really good point. You both could do other work. You don't have to do this. So I'm really curious what inside you has motivated you to take on what is arguably one of the most important and seemingly most American and intractable American problems. Some of my pastor friends call this America's original sin. What's motivating you? I think we'd all love to hear how you're holding this.
I mean, for me, I think it's really the story I told. I mean, I would have been happy for the Department of Justice, as it should have, to have taken this on. But I knew, given the times and circumstances of when this happened, that wasn't going to happen. And so I believe, if not now, when? And if not someone else, then I guess it's going to be me. That's certainly a very important part, as you know, Rabbi, of our tradition as Jews. I kind of think the way that they joke about it in our law office right now, which is much bigger than it was then, is that the phrase is Robbie acts. So the advice that's given to junior associates in our law firm is you better not give Robbie an idea if you're not sure that it's actually supported, because she will then act on it. So I think that's what motivated me. I really felt that something needed to be done about it. And I was very, very concerned that the governmental authorities who would we normally expect to do it wouldn't do the job they need to do. Now again, we have a very different attitude at the Department of at the Department of Justice, and with Attorney General Garland, I won't have those concerns.
So yeah, look, I think you can't do this work and not have it be deeply personal on so many levels. I'm sure it's true of so many who do work in the social justice space. It's deeply personal. For me, I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and while that's always informed my identity, I think never more so has it informed my identity than in the last few years. And I think it's really easy and not crazy to draw parallels to the darkest times in our history in this moment. But I also think that there's a difference, and that we live in a country that's based on the rule of law, and we have a justice system, and we can use it to fight back. And that's what this case is all about. It's about using the tools we have to protect our rights, to protect the rights of others when they come under attack. And so when you get a call from Robbie Kaplan asking if you want to help her sue Nazis, I don't know what answer there's to give other than yes, no matter who you are. But for me, particularly given my family history, this just felt like such a natural thing for me to do. If I wish we didn't have to sue Nazis, but if we did, I feel very lucky to be a part of it. And I think, we haven't talked much about this piece, but it's important. It's been heartening to watch that while trial has certainly taken some time. We're going to trial this fall, as I said. Even before we get to trial, it's been very heartening to watch the case have very real impacts. And so when you have Richard Spencer, who's one of our defendants, complaining in court that this case has been financially crippling, and other defendants say they can't go about their business because we've sued them and they can't open a new building and they don't want to be sued again, so they're not going to go to this event. That's what this is about. This is about holding them accountable and showing that there are very real financial and operational and legal consequences for this behavior. And when we go to trial this fall and win these large civil judgments against them, we can effectively bankrupt and dismantle them in a major way that will have impacts that extend well beyond Charlottesville. And so, again, if we have to sue Nazis in 2021, I feel like this is the way to do it. It has been gratifying to watch the impact so far, and I feel very lucky to get to be a part of this effort.
Well, Amy and Rabbi, I want to say thank you to the two of you. We're going to wrap up in just a few moments. We just had the holiday of Purim in the Jewish calendar, and there's a line at the end of the book of Esther that says, perhaps I was created for a moment such as this. And as horrifying as what these folks have done, knowing that my kids are growing up in a world with the two of you brings me great comfort and great inspiration. And I just personally want to thank both of you and your team. In a moment, we're going to hear from my beloved friend and pastor, DeWayne Davis, to wrap us up. But just a couple notes. Friends, if you were inspired tonight, I'd really like to invite you to join me to contribute to Integrity First for America. Whether it's a $5 gift or a $5,000 gift or a $500,000 gift. With our money, we get to help make the world we want to live in. And I want to live in a world where Amy and Robbie sue the hell out of the Nazis. So please join me. They and their team are extraordinary. I want to thank everybody tonight, Pastor Starr Brown, and in a minute, Pastor Davis, and our two incredible speakers. I want to thank the Redleaf Foundation, Lynn and Andy Redleaf, for their generous support, and to all of our co-sponsors, the Kaleo Center, The Table, St. Joan of Arc, TC Jewfolk, First Covenant, Muslim American Society, JCA, Jewish Community Action, JCRC, White Bear Unitarian, Mount Zion, McAllister Center for Religious Life, Bethel Synagogue, and of course, Shir Tikvah and Integrity First for America and all their staffs. There are a bunch more questions that we have in the chat, and our time is going to close in just a moment. I'm sorry we did not get to all of them. I feel like we barely scratched the surface. Maybe Amy and Robbie, we can have you back, and bless you all as you are heading off in October. I know that Shir Tikvah will be holding the two of you in our prayers during High Holy Days, and all of your plaintiffs. This is important holy work, friends. Integrity First for America will be happy to get back to you. I saw many wonderful questions in the chat we didn't get to. And Robbie, I saw a lawyer who wrote that Shir, they are interested in helping to sue Nazis. So, you know, looks good to me. Before I invite Pastor Davis, Amy or Robbie, do you have a final word before I have him close us out?
And I would just say that we live in a country that's been tragic in certain ways and miraculous in certain ways in terms of the promise, at least, of our Constitution and of our democracy. And these groups, in particular, the people we've sued in Charlottesville, I think present the single greatest threat to our democracy and our Constitution, not to mention to lives today. And it's so important that we recognize the threat for what it is, that we speak of it honestly and candidly in our discourse, and that we do everything we can to fight back.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think this is the greatest threat facing our country, our democracy, our communities right now. And as I said earlier, not just one community, but basically all communities. Our fates are so deeply intertwined here, and we have an obligation, no matter if we are a direct target or an indirect target, to do something here. But we should be clear that nearly all of us, and I suspect basically all of us on this call, are direct targets here. And it's so important that we recognize that and we act. I know many of you had asked about supporting this case in the chat. You should know that every dollar you donate directly supports this litigation, and specifically the security and other sort of third-party costs like evidence collection to keep our team safe and ensure we win at trial this fall. We're a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible. And you should know that unless you are planning to be our single largest donor, your donation will also be anonymous, and we can work with you to ensure it remains anonymous if that's a concern, since I did see someone ask that. We of course want to make sure that those of you who are generously supporting this effort don't have to worry about the same security concerns we deal with. That is what we are here for. So please reach out to us. We put our email address and our website in the chat, contact@integrityfirstforamerica.org, or just integrityfirstforamerica.org, and we can answer any questions that we didn't get to tonight, and work with you however is possible to make sure you can support this in a way that you're comfortable and continue to spread the word as well. Thank you.
Amy and Robbie, thank you so much. I also want to thank Adeline and Becca, our interpreters tonight, for helping to make this accessible, and to the Integrity First for America and Shir Tikvah staff, who behind the scenes have done extraordinary work. I'd like to introduce my very beloved colleague and dear friend, Pastor DeWayne Davis, who used to be at our MCC church and in December moved over to Plymouth Congregational Church. Pastor Davis and I, along with Pastor Rebecca Vocal, who couldn't be here tonight, have somewhat of a clergy conversation that we do, where we often speak about racism and racial justice, and anti-Semitism and GLBTQ liberation. Pastor Davis and I have stood together in the sweltering heat of the summer and in the frigid cold, and in every season between, recognizing quite clearly that if he is not safe as a Black man, I am not safe as a white Jewish man, and vice versa, and have really, I have learned through him that justice is about showing up and loving each other in public. And we should all be as blessed to have him as a spiritual leader. So Pastor Davis.
Thank you, Rabbi Latz. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so honored to be here, and I am so just so profoundly proud of the work that Integrity First America and Amy and Rabbi are doing. It really I think is serendipitous that what I wanted to share with you as we close, they are doing the very type of work that I think is going to give us what we need to do this work. When Rabbi Latz sent a message to me to ask me to join this, I was in the middle of what I do every February. I was wrestling with Black History Month. I wrestle with it because we are on a battle of trying to reclaim a usable past. And one of the challenges of doing that is that we are up against a lot of forgetting, intentional forgetting. And that's why the work that Rabbi and Amy are doing is so critically important to tackling white supremacy. When I got the invitation to come to you, I was reading the essays of Toni Morrison, and she had a particular line that has been resonating with me ever since, in which she says, history versus memory, memory versus memorylessness, rememory as in recollecting and remembering is the struggle, the pitched battle between remembering and forgetting. And when I heard that statement, it occurred to me that memory has always been a tool of white supremacy, where the historical record is likely to give the lie to the atrocities that have been committed in the name of nation or faith. It is the use of memory as willed creation that has allowed white supremacy to construct a cultural, political, religious, and economic edifice of history that centers whiteness, that degrades and distorts personhood of Black and Jewish lives, and promotes a narrative of greatness and exceptionalism that is synonymous with whiteness. And so from the violence and hatred in Charlottesville to the rioting and violence at the US Capitol, we have been reminded of the unmistakable and uncontrollable rage of white supremacy. Its systemic normative capture of our every institution makes white supremacy's biting edge seem debatable or deniable. And the use of memory is how it is done. After Charlottesville, even with the death of Heather Heyer, much of the public conversation led by a cowed media determined to present both sides equivocated in its response. It was as if those young white men wearing khakis and red shirts knew that their middle-class, middle America costuming would disarm the media and white people who seemed to be mesmerized by their seeming innocence, would completely overlook the horror and menace in their anti-Semitic rhetoric and their violence. And so disarmed, our memory started to fail us. White supremacy is maintained through the contesting of history and memory. Immediately after the violent breach of the Capitol by Trump voters and white nationalists, the conservative media and GOP operatives and politicians sought to recast what happened and who was responsible. Despite Trump flags and campaign signs, Confederate flags and Nazi symbols, and racist and anti-Semitic chants and invective hurled at officers, conservatives not only denied the presence and participation of Trump voters and Nazis and white nationalists at the Capitol that day, they tried over and over again to misremember who breached the Capitol. And so I am grateful because the work that Amy and Rabbi are doing is calling us to memory. It's no surprise that in the Jewish faith and the Christian faith, the worship life is based upon remembering and memory. And I hope that the work that they do will give us the intentional choice to remember, to will the creation as a counter to the narrative that is prevailing now. I will close that one way that memory eludes us, it seems so innocuous and so innocent. Over the last few months, here in Minneapolis, they've been talking about the George Floyd trial. Inadvertently or intentionally, remembering it differently. George Floyd is not on trial. This is how a willed creation of a different narrative seeps in. I am so glad that these lawyers are going after those people so that their willed creation of a narrative will be countered by our willed creation of the truth, of our imaged and our lives as God's own. May it be so.
I mean,
Amen. Pastor, thank you. And as we have done before many a time, I look forward to standing with you, dear God, in moments of joy and celebration. But you can't tell, but Pastor DeWayne is significantly taller than me. So it is, he has big arms. I have shed many a tear on his shoulder and he on mine. And I'm not happy that we have to be in this fight, Pastor, but since we do, there's nobody I'd rather be in than you, my friend. Friends, we thank you for being here. Please do your best to support Integrity First for America, and let's build an America that's worthy of all of our children. I wish you blessings tonight and deep gratitude to everyone who participated. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.